I first saw her at a corner cafe 2 blocks from campus, the kind of place that tried too hard to be rustic, with mismatched chairs and vintage posters that had nothing to do with coffee. I was there alone, nursing a black Americano and trying to focus on an online quiz I was pretending to care about. She walked in like someone who didn't care if she belonged, no makeup, a wrinkled blazer, and sneakers that had seen too many miles. She looked imperfect, but alive. Not the fake, curated kind of alive you see on Instagram. Real. Like she'd been through some shit and wasn't pretending otherwise. I don't even know what caught my attention first. Maybe it was the way she scanned the room like she was hoping not to be noticed. Or maybe it was that she ordered her drink with a soft, quiet tone and then waited in the corner without checking her phone once. You'd think I'd be into girls my age, 22, junior year, bio major, yada yada. But none of them ever made me feel like this. Like I was awake. She sat by the window, flipping through a book. Not scrolling. Reading. And at one point, she smiled at something on the page, the tiniest curl at the corner of her mouth. That smile, it looked foreign on her face. Like it hadn't been there in years. I couldn't stop glancing at her. Something about her, mid-40s, maybe? Pulled at me in a way I didn't understand yet. Not just attraction. Curiosity. I didn't know her name, but I wanted to know what had wiped that smile off her face for so long, and why it chose today to come back. I dropped my pen on the floor near her table. Stupid move. Classic. She looked up when I reached for it, and for a split second, our eyes met. I nodded, tried to play it casual. She nodded back, polite. Reserved. Reading Bukowski? I asked, noticing the book cover. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised. You know Bukowski? I shrugged. He's depressing, but honest. That got her. Her lips twitched like they wanted to form a real smile but forgot how. Most people just think he's an old drunk. He probably was, I said. But even drunks can tell the truth. That was the moment. Her face cracked, not in a bad way. In a real way. That smile again, this time full. Deep. And it hit me that I was maybe the first person in a long time to talk to her like she was still human. You a student? She asked. I nodded. University. Bio major. You? She laughed softly. God, I haven't been asked what I do in a long time. I teach literature at the high school downtown. And just like that, the conversation kept going. I learned her name was Claire. Divorced. No kids. Lived nearby. Taught for almost 20 years. She liked old French films and hated TikTok. We laughed about that for a while. She told me she didn't really come to the cafe often, just needed a break from grading essays. That first talk lasted 2 hours. Neither of us noticed. I walked her to her car, not because I was trying to be charming, but because I didn't want to stop talking. She hesitated before getting in. You're too young for this kind of conversation, she said. And you're too old to keep waiting for someone to have one with, I replied, without really thinking. There it was again. That smile. The real one. This time it stayed a little longer. She started the car and left. I stood in the parking lot like a fool, watching her go, already thinking about how I'd see her again. We didn't plan to see each other again, but it happened anyway. A week later, I was walking home from class, cutting through a quieter side street to avoid the noise from a campus protest about housing or tuition or whatever the outrage of the day was, when I saw her again. Claire was sitting on a bench outside a flower shop, sipping from a paper cup and staring at nothing. I almost didn't stop. I could have just kept walking, maybe nodded if she looked up, but instead I walked straight to her like I belonged in that moment. She looked up, her face shifting from neutral to surprised and then something softer. I pointed at the empty space beside her, and she moved her purse without saying a word. We talked again, this time slower, more careful. She asked questions about my life, but I could tell she didn't expect real answers. When I told her about my parents' divorce when I was 14, about how my mom moved to Florida with some guy she met at a wine tasting retreat, and how my dad kind of gave up on being a dad after that, she didn't try to make it better or offer sympathy. She just nodded, like she understood without needing to say so. When she told me she'd been married once, for 11 years, and that it ended not with a scream or a fight but with silence, I didn't interrupt or ask for more details. I let her talk until she didn't feel like talking anymore. That night, she gave me her number. She hesitated before pressing send on the text to me, like she was still thinking it over even while doing it. I saved it without comment, and we both acted like nothing unusual had happened. From then on, it became routine, but a strange one. We didn't go out in public much. We met in places just outside the edges of my world and far enough from hers. She picked quiet cafés, bookstores that didn't mind if you never bought anything, a hiking trail where she claimed no one ever went on weekdays. Each time, it felt like we were stealing something we weren't supposed to have, even though we weren't doing anything wrong. Not yet, anyway. It wasn't until the fourth or fifth time we met that she touched my hand. I was telling her about a presentation I had to give for one of my psych electives, something about attachment theory, and I said, mostly joking, that I was probably avoidant as hell. She reached over and put her hand on mine, didn't say a word, just left it there for a second. I stopped talking. She pulled back quickly and looked away, embarrassed. But it was too late. Something had changed. There was a barrier between us that neither of us mentioned, but it sat there all the same. The age difference wasn't just about numbers. It was about everything that came with those numbers. I still lived in a rented room, worked part-time at the campus lab, barely knew how to budget my own meals. She owned a house, paid taxes, voted in local elections. When she spoke about the school board or the water bill or her neighbor's dog digging holes in her yard, I couldn't relate, not really. And when I talked about late-night study sessions or how dumb campus politics had gotten, she just smiled with that distant kind of patience people have when they've already lived through it all. We had our own lives, running parallel but never meant to intersect. And yet we kept walking into each other's world like we didn't know any better. The problem started when someone did notice. I was walking out of her house one afternoon, a weekday, which was already risky, and one of her neighbors was standing by the mailbox, pulling out a stack of envelopes. She glanced at me, then at the house I'd just come from. I nodded politely, tried not to look guilty, but I could tell she saw something she'd remember. Claire lived in a neighborhood where people didn't have a lot of excitement. A new face was always a conversation starter. A young guy walking out of a 40-something woman's front door on a Tuesday afternoon? That was an entire episode of speculation waiting to happen. 2 days later, Claire called me. She sounded calm, too calm, like she'd rehearsed everything she was about to say. One of the parents at school asked me if I was dating someone, she said. I sat up on my bed, the textbook I'd been pretending to read slipping off my lap. What did you say? I said no. Which is technically true, she said, then paused. They said they saw me with someone. Someone much younger. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything I could say that wouldn't make it worse. I don't know how they found out. Maybe the neighbor, maybe someone saw us on that trail last week. Doesn't matter. The rumor's out now, she continued, her voice flat. They're not just talking about me. They're asking if he's a student. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Measured, steady. The way people breathe when they're trying not to panic. I don't want to stop seeing you, I said. But I get it if you. I'm not making decisions over a rumor, she cut in. But I need you to understand something. If this goes public, I could lose my job. I don't have tenure. I don't have protection. All it takes is one parent making the wrong kind of noise. I swallowed hard, stared at the floor. So what do we do? I don't know, she said quietly. I really don't. And just like that, the weight of the real world came crashing in. Everything that had felt like a secret little world we were building was suddenly exposed, fragile, ready to break. Claire ended the call by saying she needed some space to think. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't sure if this was a mistake or just a risk she hadn't calculated yet. I sat on my bed long after the call ended, staring at the wall, wondering if I'd ruined something just by wanting it too much. For almost 2 weeks, I didn't hear from Claire. I tried not to text her. I didn't want to seem pushy or desperate. But every day that passed without a message or a call made it harder to believe she'd reach out again. I kept replaying her voice in my head, the calm way she said she needed space, like she was pushing the pause button on something we both knew had no future. I didn't tell anyone about her, not even my closest friend at school. There was no way to explain it without making it sound ridiculous or risky or like a fantasy that had gotten out of hand. But it hadn't been a fantasy. It was real. It was quiet moments on park benches and long conversations over coffee. It was that night when she grabbed my wrist gently and told me I made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. And now it was silence. The thing is, I didn't stop thinking about her. And I didn't stop watching the places where we used to meet. Sometimes I'd walk by the cafe just to see if her car was parked outside. Other times, I went to the bookstore pretending to browse. She was never there. I didn't want to believe it was over, but I also didn't want to be the guy who couldn't take a hint. I started sleeping less, thinking more, drifting in and out of lectures without really absorbing anything. My roommates noticed, but they didn't say anything beyond a few harmless jokes about me looking like a ghost. I laughed when I had to, nodded when I didn't know what else to do. But inside, it was just waiting. Then, one night, just past 11, I got a message. It was her. No greeting, just an address and the words, "If you want to talk, I'm here." I didn't even think. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and was out the door before I could question what I was doing. It wasn't her house. It was a small place just outside the city, a rented cabin that people used for weekend getaways. When I knocked, the door opened instantly. She must have been waiting right by it. Claire didn't look like she'd been crying, but she looked tired, like someone who hadn't had a full night's sleep in a long time. She didn't say anything. She just stepped aside, and I walked in. The room was dim, warm, and quiet. She'd made tea. Not for show, not to fill the air, it was just something she always did when her nerves were on edge. We sat on the couch, and for a few minutes, we didn't talk at all. She stared at the wall like she was reading something only she could see, and I waited. Eventually, she spoke. "I thought it would be easier to let it go," she said. "I thought if I put enough distance between us, the feeling would fade." I looked at her, unsure of where this was going. "Did it?" "No," she said. "It didn't." I leaned forward. "So why now?" Claire exhaled slowly. "Because I realized I'm not afraid of being judged. I've lived long enough to stop caring about whispers. But I'm afraid of being the reason you screw up your life. That woman who gets you kicked out of school or makes you lose respect from your friends or family. That's not who I want to be." I nodded slowly, understanding even if it stung. "You're not ruining anything." "I'm not a kid, Claire." I knew what this was. I still do. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was trying to see if I was being honest or just saying what she wanted to hear. Then she stood up, walked over, and sat next to me instead of across. Her hand brushed mine again, and this time I grabbed it before she could pull away. We didn't talk much after that. The night stretched on, and everything felt strangely calm. We lay on the couch, side by side, not touching at first, then slowly letting that barrier dissolve again. At one point, she rested her head against my chest, and I held her like we had done it 100 times before. Nothing about it felt rushed or secretive. It felt like something we both needed, if only for one night. Around 3 a.m, she whispered, "This is the only place I don't feel like I'm constantly being watched." I nodded, not because I understood exactly, but because I could feel the weight behind those words. She had spent her whole adult life being responsible, making choices with consequences, thinking ahead. And here I was, someone she had no business being with, but maybe that was why it worked. The next morning, we left separately. She made it clear that this couldn't be a regular thing. We'd meet only when we both felt like the risk was manageable. I said I understood. And I meant it. But that's when the real problem began. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. No words. Just a photo. It was grainy, low resolution, clearly taken from a distance, but it was unmistakably us, standing outside the cabin, Claire's hand on my shoulder, my arm around her waist. The timestamp was from that same night. I didn't reply. I didn't know who had sent it. But the message was obvious. Later that day, I got a call from her. No hello. Just panic. Someone saw us. I told her I got the photo. She cursed under her breath, then went quiet. I didn't ask who she thought it was. If someone had followed her, if a parent at school had been snooping, if the neighbor had started a chain reaction, it didn't matter. What mattered was that we weren't invisible anymore. I'll handle it, she said after a long pause. I just need time. But time wasn't something we had anymore. I could feel it slipping, like whatever little world we had built was now on borrowed minutes. We were no longer just people trying to escape something. We were now characters in a story someone else had started writing for us. When the email came in, I was in the middle of a group presentation. I saw the notification flash on my laptop screen out of the corner of my eye. No subject line, just a file attachment. I felt my stomach twist. I waited until after class, then found the nearest empty hallway and opened it. Another photo. This time, it was clearer. Same angle, same night, but closer. Someone had been watching us longer than we realized. There was no message in the email, just the photo. But the meaning was obvious. Someone wanted this to reach me, maybe to scare me, or maybe to test how much I was willing to risk. I forwarded it to Claire without any message. She called me 30 minutes later, her voice tight and low, like she was trying not to cry but didn't want to sound weak. She said she recognized the background in the photo, and now she was sure it wasn't a neighbor or a random stranger. The person who took it must have followed her to the cabin. She didn't say who she thought it was, but she didn't have to. We both knew it could only be someone connected to her life, maybe someone at school, maybe someone close enough to have reason and time. I didn't ask for names, because I could hear in her voice that she didn't want to name anyone out loud, as if doing that would make it all more real. 2 days later, I got a message from her late at night. She said she'd told someone. Not the school, not her family. Her closest friend, a woman named Jenna, who had been her co-worker for 10 years. Claire said she trusted her completely and didn't want to live with the paranoia anymore. I told her I didn't think that was a good idea. She said it was already done. I didn't respond after that. I couldn't tell if she'd made the right call or just lit a match next to a leaking gas line. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I had texts from 3 people I barely knew, all classmates, none of whom I'd ever spoken to outside of lab sessions or group projects. They weren't rude, not exactly, but the tone was off, curious, teasing, slightly condescending. One of them sent a meme about older women, another joked about needing tutoring from Miss Robinson. I didn't answer any of them, but I knew what it meant. The story had gotten out. It wasn't just a photo anymore. It was a rumor with momentum. I called Claire. She didn't pick up. I tried again an hour later, and this time she answered. Her voice was flat, mechanical, like she'd spent the whole day trying not to react. I had a meeting with the principal today, she said. He didn't say where the rumors came from, but I could tell he knew more than he was letting on. He kept asking if there was anything I wanted to disclose. I asked if she denied it. I didn't admit anything, she replied. I just said my personal life was personal. But that won't matter if parents start asking questions. I asked what she wanted to do next. She said she didn't know. Her job wasn't protected. She wasn't married, but this kind of thing, especially with someone half her age, wasn't something people would ignore. She could already feel the shift in how people looked at her in the teacher's lounge. Jenna wasn't answering her calls. Her inbox was suddenly full of emails from parents with vague concerns about her professional judgment. None of them mentioned me directly, but the connection didn't need to be written. Everyone already knew what was happening. No one wanted to say it out loud. That weekend, Claire had to attend a district event for faculty. One of those mandatory appearances where you smile and act like nothing is wrong. She invited me. I said that was crazy. She said it wasn't about hiding anymore. She was tired of it. I tried to talk her out of it, but she didn't want to hear it. So I went. I wore a plain button-up shirt, kept my expression neutral, and stayed a step behind her at all times. It was held at a hotel conference room, one of those sterile places with bad lighting and plastic name tags. People looked at us the second we walked in. Some nodded politely. Some turned away immediately. Claire acted like none of it mattered. She introduced me to a few people as a friend from the university. I kept my mouth shut unless someone asked me something directly. But I could feel the eyes. Not angry, not kind, just watching. Halfway through the evening, someone asked me outright. A middle-aged man in a cheap blazer, a department chair from another school. He smiled when he said it, but there was nothing friendly about it. So how long have you and Claire been seeing each other? He asked casually, like he was asking about the weather. Claire froze beside me. I looked at him for a long second, then answered, long enough to know what we're doing isn't your business. He laughed, took a sip of his drink, and walked away without another word. But the damage was done. More people started looking. Some walked over to say hi. Others whispered behind folded programs. Claire stood beside me like a statue, hands at her sides, eyes straight ahead. We left early. On the ride home, we didn't talk. She didn't turn on the radio. She didn't reach for my hand. When she dropped me off, she leaned her head against the steering wheel for a moment before saying anything. I thought I could handle it, she said quietly. I thought if I just stood my ground, people would eventually move on. But they won't. I didn't know what to say. She looked at me. You deserve better than being someone's scandal. I shook my head. You're not a scandal. You're someone I care about. She didn't reply. That night, I realized something had changed. We hadn't broken up, but the space between us had grown bigger. We were still standing close, but something was pulling us in different directions. I didn't know how much longer we could pretend we were still on the same side of the line. The next time we saw each other, it wasn't planned. It happened at a grocery store, of all places, 3 days after the conference. I was walking past the dairy section when I saw her down the aisle, basket in hand, staring blankly at a row of eggs. She looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, like everything that had happened in the last month had worn her down just enough to show. For a second I thought about walking away, giving her space, pretending I didn't see her, but then she turned her head and caught me. Neither of us smiled. I walked over slowly, unsure if I was interrupting or rescuing. She glanced at me, then back at the eggs. Didn't expect to see you here. I nodded, my hands in my pockets. I live 3 blocks away. She gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. Right. Of course you do. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by muted store music and distant shopping cart wheels. I didn't reach for her. I didn't touch her hand. It didn't feel like that kind of moment. I've been thinking, she said, still not looking at me. About what comes next. Have you decided? I asked. She nodded, finally meeting my eyes. I've requested a transfer to a different school district. Out of the city. I felt my chest tighten. Is this because of me? It's because of everything, she said. I thought I could manage it. I thought if I just kept teaching and doing my job, people would get tired of the story. But they haven't. It's not going to stop. The looks, the meetings, the notes in my mailbox from anonymous parents pretending to care about professionalism. I can't teach in a place where I'm not allowed to be human. I didn't argue. I couldn't. What could I say that didn't sound selfish or desperate? I never blamed you, she continued. Not once. If anything, you reminded me that I could still feel something. That I wasn't just a name on a staff list or a woman with no personal life. I stayed quiet, listening. But this thing, she gestured between us, was always going to burn out. We were always waiting for the fallout, and now that it's here, I'm just trying to leave with what little I can still hold on to. I finally spoke. So that's it? She looked tired. I think it has to be. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight settle in my chest, not heavy like heartbreak, but sharp and quiet like the last click of a door before it closes. I don't regret it, I said, voice steady. None of it. Neither do I, she replied. We stood in silence again. Then she reached out, fingers brushing mine, a brief touch, and then it was gone. She picked up a carton of eggs, placed them gently into her basket, and walked away. She didn't look back. That night, I sat on the floor of my room with my back against the bed, staring at nothing for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't text her. I didn't call anyone. I just let it end. Not with a fight or a dramatic scene. Just a slow drift into the space where people go when their part in your story is done. The following week, a friend from one of my classes pulled me aside. He told me the rumors were still spreading, but people had moved on to new targets. I was no longer the headline. I was old gossip. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. A few days later, I went back to the trail where we first kissed. I sat on the same bench and watched people pass. A family walked by with a dog. A couple ran past, laughing and out of breath. I watched the sky turn dim. I stayed until it was too dark to read the signs. In the weeks that followed, life went on. I turned in assignments. I went to class. I deleted the messages I hadn't opened. I didn't erase her number. I didn't block it either. It just sat there, part of my phone's memory now, like everything else. Sometimes I wondered if she made it to the new school. If she liked it there. If she still taught poetry. If she still made tea when she was nervous. I wondered if she ever told anyone the full story, not the rumors, but the truth. That we met by accident. That we stayed because it felt real. That we left because it had to end. A month after the last time I saw her, I got a letter. A real letter. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. I thought I could leave without saying everything. I was wrong. You made me feel alive again. Not in the way that people romanticize or write songs about. Just in the real way, the quiet way, the way where your body remembers how to breathe because someone else sees you clearly. You didn't fix me. You didn't break me either. You just stood next to me while I remembered who I was. That's more than most people ever get. Thank you for that. Take care of yourself. Please. See? I folded it once, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer next to my bed. I didn't reread it. I didn't need to. Some stories don't end with a perfect line. Some just pause where they have to, and maybe they don't continue. Or maybe they do. But that's not part of this story. That's something else. Something not written yet.